Right then, let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2-on-1 Powerchair Football podcast powered by MK Battery, and it's episode 51. As always, a big thank you to MK Battery for their continued support of the podcast and every WFA National League live stream. I'm Ryan Sipple, and joining me once again is Gregg Baxter. Gregg, good to have you back. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Matt. I'm glad to hear you got your voice back after the weekend. Yeah, I'm enjoying the lovely sunny weather we've got in the north. It's rare the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I can't say I share that down south. It's currently torrential rain in Kent. So very jealous on that front. And to the point about my voice, it is nice. It's probably not back to 100%, but a full weekend of commentary will certainly take its toll. So I've got a few more days to rest it ahead of Gameweek 4 of the Premiership. Of course, in this episode, we'll be recapping all the action from Gameweek 4 of the 25-26 Slater and Gordon Championship, the penultimate weekend of the season, with everything now finally poised heading into the fifth and final weekend on the 11th and 12th of April. I think it is fair to say this is the strongest championship season we've ever seen. For the first time ever, all 12 teams picked up a win across a National League weekend. And that does not happen unless the level is high across the board. There are no easy games anymore, no guaranteed points. And if you're not right, you get punished. It's a crazy stat. And that includes the Premiership as well, doesn't it, Gregg?
That is bonkers. You just said that to me there, and my eyes widened in shock. First time ever that's happened. I mean, like you say, it just shows the caliber of the teams in the championship, where the level is going, which is just great to see. And like you said, there are no easy games anymore. You cannot rock up as first versus 12th and think, oh, that's a guaranteed easy win, and we'll bash in a few goals and increase our goal difference. So long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that really stands out is the points total needed at the bottom. We've spoken about it at length on other recaps of the championship. For years, you've needed around 14 or 15 points, which has been enough to stay clear of the relegation zone in 11th and 12th. That's been the benchmark. But right now, 10th and 11th in the division are both sitting on 14 points with one full weekend still to go. So that clearly isn't going to be enough this time. You're probably looking at closer to 17, 18, maybe crazily even upwards of 20 points to guarantee safety, which just shows how tight and competitive the whole division is. You'll remember after game week 3, we spoke about there being just 55 goals scored, the lowest ever at a National League Championship weekend. It didn't last long because game week 4 has gone even lower. 52 goals scored across the weekend. But importantly, and I think we have to make the point, it isn't about a lack of quality. It's the polar opposite. It's the discipline, the fine margins across the division. So we head into the final weekend with pretty much everything still on the line. The relegation battle isn't decided. The fight for the third place playoff is still open. And at the top, we've still got a really intriguing title race. And that's exactly what you want going into the last set of fixtures. Gregg, you was there Saturday. You've caught up on Sunday's fixtures as well. Give me your assessments of the weekend, just how competitive and unforgiving the division is right now.
Oh, it was really entertaining because a lot of the teams at the bottom were taking big points off the teams at the top. Teams at the top were seeing their opponents drop points in games that you'd expect them to win. And they were given opportunities time and time again to, make up some ground or increase their advantage over teams around them. And they themselves then couldn't capitalize because they were dropping points to the teams toward the bottom of the table as well. You really couldn't pick a winner in most of the games. They were just on a knife-shaped balance. It was so entertaining to watch, especially on the Saturday when I was there. Sunday, watching it back, lots of drama, lots of teams that maybe performed well on the Saturday that didn't perform well on the Sunday. And it's like you say, it's left it so uniquely tied up at the top towards the bottom that we are set for a fantastic showdown come game week 5 in what is literally just a couple of weeks away.
Yeah, the turnaround in games and fixture weekends is fairly relentless, not just in the Championship, but the Premiership as well. So as always, we'll work through the division team by team, starting from 12th and building our way to the top, looking at how game week 4 played out, where each side now sits, and what it all means heading into the final weekend of the season. Greg and I, as we always do, will have the WFA Scoreline app and or FA Fulltime alongside us as Greg shows me his phone screen. We do encourage others to have that up as well because it provides that fantastic point of reference. And very quickly, before we do, a big shout out to William Renton, Harry Maxwell and Charlie McClellan. Anyone that follows the WFA social media will know where I'm going with this one. They collectively officiated Teesside Steel versus GBG Saracens with a combined age of just 54, the youngest trio of officials in WFA history. So it's incredible to see that next generation of officials coming through the system. Now, we'll start in 12th with Nottingham Forest. And I think it's important to frame this properly and add all the context possible, because in most other seasons, you'd probably still be saying Nottingham Forest have a credible chance going into the final weekend to get themselves out of that bottom bracket. But as we've already discussed, this isn't most seasons. The standard across the Championship this year, particularly in that lower group, has gone up so much. We've spoken about the history and the point accumulation needed to avoid the bottom 2 placements. And just based on the games left they have to play, I don't see Nottingham Forest getting close to the 14 points of the 2 teams above them, let alone the 17, 18, potentially even 20-point mark needed to categorically assure yourself and your team that you are clear. Now, the weekend itself started incredibly positively. They opened up against Altrincham PFC, a side historically they've struggled against, and conceded almost immediately through Jack Johnson, I believe. And from that point on, you're thinking it follows a similar pattern. We had Ben Rogers on the last podcast who spoke about how once they go 1-0 down, they've struggled to recover. They've struggled to believe that they can get back in the games. But this time it was different. They stayed calm. They stayed composed. And they actually grew into the game. Ben Rogers was excellent in the centre in the first half. He's developing that relationship with Toby and Maurice, which we spoke about at length. But there is a few lapses. There is a few times where they can do better. And the opposition goals, not just in the opener, but across the weekend, could probably be categorised as more errors than being carved open. But it was in that one, Aston Walls was brilliant out wide, relentless, won his battles, turned defence into attack, and that equaliser, which was worked through him, finished by Riley Priestley, was probably, certainly from what I've seen, one of their best goals of the season. You could argue there was a potential 2-1 in the build-up, but it wasn't given, and Forest took advantage. And then at the half-time break, really interestingly, Steve Priestley makes a big call. He takes Ben Rogers off, moves Riley Priestley into the centre, shifts Aston Walls wide with Gary Meakin. And I questioned it at the time. I have no problem admitting it, but it worked. Riley held his own against Jack Johnson. The other players won their individual battles, and Aston Walls capped it off brilliantly with a late winner. So from that point, you're looking at it thinking, that is a huge moment. Could that be the catalyst that sees them go on a run of games where they're not losing, they're picking up points, whether that's 1 or 3, but Sadly, it just didn't come off, and that has been the story of their season. They couldn't build on it because from there it was three straight defeats to GBG Saracens, which was 3-0, Norwich City, which was 2-0, and then Teesside Steel, which was also 3-0. So no goals and ultimately no way of carrying that momentum forward. Greg, give me your assessments of Nottingham Forest.
I mean, you've pretty much summed it all up there, to be honest, Ryan. And I will obviously caveat everything I say by admitting that I didn't see any of them on the Saturday. And so everything I've watched has been come from watching the streams back on for the Sunday. But I was there when they got that win against Olte, as I was told it's meant to be said by David Dees. Olte, got to pronounce it like a Mancunian. And when they got that win on Core B, I was on Core A, but it just felt like a bit of momentum was generating because Ultrium came into the game week off the back of a really positive game week 3. And so you would have looked at it straight up and gone, well, that's a difficult first game. You don't want to face them at the minute because they picked up a bit of form. And like you said, to go 1-0 down and show the character to come back and win was really promising. And you thought, well, could they take that into their next game against GBG Saracens, another team in and around them? Even if they'd avoided defeat, it would have been somewhat of a great result for Forest just to keep themselves within touch and distance. But it just did fall away a little bit, didn't it? It got a little bit scrappy sometimes at the back. Like you say, goals down to more defensive errors than being outdone by quality attacking play a lot of the time. And like you say, any other season, you'd say, you know what, they've still got a very good chance of avoiding the playoff. But this year, the standard in quality and signings for teams in and around the bottom, I think, has really been Forest undoing, because you look at it and go, Hull and Man City, the two teams that are directly above them, both made January signings or summer signings that have adapted their team and given them an extra boost to get themselves, closer to the teams above them, and they've drawn themselves away from Forest, who have been left at the bottom by no real fault of their own, because they are still improving. I think we have to say that. Compared to the seasons gone by, this is a much better Nottingham Forest team. But they're going to find themselves, you would assume and think, based on form and fixtures, in that playoff again. It's just saying to look, keep going because you are getting better. This season, it's just the standard's been that much higher.
That's exactly it for me. I think that Altrincham game or Alty game was probably the highlight of their season. But the problem is, every time they make ground, everyone else around them seems to match or better it. So even when they get that win, they get that draw, it doesn't actually move them any closer to safety, which is a testament to the competitiveness of the division. They're on 8 points. The teams above them already on 14. And you have to say, realistically, you're looking at game week 5 less as a survival push, and more about building something ahead of what feels like that increasingly inevitable playoff situation. Because game week 5 they open against Nottinghamshire and Manchester United, first and second in the table, before playing Villa, Rockets, Lions and Manchester City. All 4 of those have something to play for, either at the top or at the bottom. So I have to say, at this stage, it's probably becomes about confidence, about performances, and preparing mentally for that playoff scenario, which, to be fair, is something that Forest have navigated, I think, the last 3, 4, potentially even 5 seasons. They've been drawn into that situation and managed to regain their championship status from it.
I think what you would say is, we don't know who's going to potentially come in for a spot into the championship for next season and who's going to be in that playoff. Forest, I'd feel a lot more comfortable and confident in Forest retaining their spot in the championship going in with this season than possibly in seasons gone by, where because they've made that improvement and that leap, they are going to be heavy favourites in that game. Whereas in seasons gone by, you'd looked at it and gone, you know what, maybe the level isn't that far off the teams coming in. So I think their continued exposure to Championship football, and especially at the standard it's been increasing at, they'll be much more confident in the playoff than maybe in years gone by.
I think for the first time ever, the playoff situation is really interesting in the fact that there is no guarantee that the current established National League sides will actually regain their spots in next season championship. And the VAR showed us that, where we saw some of the country's leading regional league teams get points, get wins against established National League sides. So yeah, to your point, it'd be intriguing to see who enters through that playoffs. If we assess the VARs and assume some of the VARs teams come in to the playoffs, you're looking at potentially a second Middlesbrough team, a Solent, maybe a second Sevenoaks side. They're good squads. So Nottingham Forest need to use game week 5 as the kind of the dress rehearsal for that fight for their 26-27 championship spot. But I do completely agree. They are improving. They are getting better. This is probably the best version of Forest I've ever seen, but they're the victims of the quality of this division, which is a real shame. But no, it's fascinating. So now let's progress to 11th. We've got Hull and East Yorkshire, who have got 14 points from their 18 games played, and they're probably the clearest example of how quickly things can change in this division. At the conclusion of game week 2, they looked like a side that were almost certain to finish bottom. They hadn't picked up anything. You were asking where the results were going to come from. But since then, everything has shifted. Everything has changed. And that's down to one factor, really. And that is the addition of Tyler McClelland, who has completely rejuvenated the squad. It's one of, and I'll throw to you in a second, Greg, it's one of the most impactful additions I've ever seen at championship level. And since he's come in, they've gone from struggling to compete with all opponents in the division to being one of the hardest teams to break down. And if you look at game weeks 3 and 4 in isolation, they're not a bottom 2 side. They're a top 3 side. On FA Full Time, there's the functionality to look at recent form, and you can set kind of the games played. If you set it to 6 or 10 games, they're in the top 3, which is remarkable when you consider the version of them we saw in game weeks 1 and game weeks 2. Now, looking at game week 4, they open with a sensational win against West Bromwich Albion Baggies, and what a start that was. Tyler scoring one of the goals of the season deep from his own half. That trademark kind of 180 spin he connects with so cleanly. And then the second comes via an own goal off Amy Sherman. And although Lewis Marshall pulls one back late on, Hull managed it really well to see out a valuable opening win. Then they back it up against Teesside Steel, a side at the time on a huge unbeaten run, and Hull were outstanding. They were disciplined, organised, frustrated them. Tyler won his central battle. They managed to nullify one of the strongest teams in the division, and Callum Jefferson also scored his first ever National League goal, so a brilliant moment for him. And then it became a bit more mixed, but still really solid. 0-0 with Manchester City, and very tactical, cagey game, it must be said, where neither side really gave anything away. And then a 3-0 defeat to Manchester United, which is probably a bit of a stark reminder of the level at the very top, before they finish with another 0-0 against Nottinghamshire. So overall 8 points from 5 games. And when you factor in their opposition as well, first, second, third, plus informed sides around them, that's an incredibly strong return. So Greg, give me your assessments firstly, and then can you think of a more impactful signing straight away, my brain goes to potentially Valentino Zagarelli in the Premiership when he came in for West Bromwich Albion, helping them secure the double. But in terms of taking someone from the bottom of the National League to challenging teams at the top within their respective division, it is a ridiculous turnaround.
Yeah, and it's hard to try and balance not doing a disservice to everyone else as a whole, whilst also not understating just how much of an impact he's had. And I'm so by no means suggesting that everyone at Hull Shropshire is naive to the fact that obviously they're in a much better spot with Tyler McLean in the middle than they were beforehand. That's just blatantly obvious. You look at the stats. Since he's joined, they've only lost one game, and that was to Manchester United this game week, which is just staggering when you look at their run of form in the first two game weeks where they didn't have a single point. His impact, and he is the most impactful signing I think I can think of, because he has taken a team that was not competing with any of the teams, not even really Nottingham Forest, and has just now made them a team that no one wants to face. Absolutely, just they know that they're up against a real battle with Tyler. He would not look out of place in most of the Premiership sides. It's not even getting to the top of the Championship or even middle of the Championship. So he's got stuck in right at the bottom, as we said in the last game week review. He scored what I can only have been told is an absolute worldie from the edge of his own box against Baggies to just give them that early lead against a Baggies side that everyone was raving about and is still raving about to this game week. And then Dolan against Teesside Steel scored a very, very good penalty and just managed the game so well. I think I was slightly disappointed, in all honesty, with that 0-0 draw with Man City, given what they put in the opening two games. But you then have to say it is a 5-game weekend for them. And that would take a lot of energy, especially out of Tyler, given he was doing the majority of both defensive and attacking work. It was a game that they nullified each other completely, just tactically. It almost seems like there was no quality given by either team. It was just matched so well, and they knew what Manchester knew what they had to do. And then going into the Sunday, they knew they were facing the top two teams. Manchester United showed their class, and like you say, it's a stark reminder of, okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Yes, we're doing well. Yes, we're competing, but we're obviously not there yet, because Manchester United put them to the sword and showed their credentials. But to bounce back from that and then play the team at the top of the table to get another 0-0 draw will leave them feeling so much more confident. And going into, the rest of their fixtures in game week 5, you look at it, Leeds Dynamos, Norwich City, they're games they can easily win, if not get a point from. And then Altrincham, and they finish the game against GW4 Saracens, and who knows how crucial that could be. You look at the final game on a Sunday, game week 5. On one court, you've got Manchester City versus Nottingham Forest. On the other, you've got Hull Shropshire versus GW4 Saracens. That could be pivotal towards who ends up in the playoff and who ends up staying upright.
Absolutely, and that's why I said that the battle at the top, the race for third, they're almost trumped by this intriguing battle at the bottom, where there's 3-4 teams trying to fight for their championship status. Just on that Manchester City game, I did commentate it. They completely cancelled one another out. I actually would have probably had Man City as the better of the two teams. So whilst Hull would be disappointed they weren't able to get the 3 points, I don't think they deserved 3 points from it. It was the Jack Humphreys versus Tyler McClellan show, a very cagey coming together of two teams matched almost identically in the standings. But everything runs through Tyler. They know that. You've just said it. He covers every inch of the court. Defensively, offensively, he dictates the tempo. He wins battles. He gives them control. But now the onus and the responsibility is the players around him increasing their levels because they're getting world-class service, I'd go as far as to say, and players like Callum Jefferson, Harrison Smith, and others uh, need to work on their anticipation, their readiness, their chair shape, and then they can hopefully turn those moments into more consistent output.
I think for me, not trying to look too far ahead because obviously they've got a battle at the bottom to potentially stay in the division and avoid a playoff. For me, the big question is next season. I'm not trying to look too far ahead, as I've said, but does Tyler fancy sticking around and doing a full season at Hull and seeing what they can achieve and what they can do? Or is he going to go, you know what? I've had an exposure to English football and I've raised a few eyebrows with, you know, just how well I'm doing. Not that we didn't know his quality, but just how much of an impact he's had. Is he then going to go, you know what? I'm not coming back. I've got to test myself, whether it be in finding a Premiership team or competing at the top of the Championship and making a team very dominant there. What the Hull do from there? Because it's a conversation we've had time and time again, right? Is the impact of international players on a club? If Hull stay up, for example, and don't go into the playoff, they're guaranteed a spot in the Championship next season if they want it. What do they do? Is the conversation I think that needs to be had at some point.
One way or another, I think Hull acknowledge that they have to have somewhat of a recruitment drive in the off season, whether that's irrelevant of what division they're competing in, whether they've got National League status or not, because the difference with Tyler in and Tyler out is night and day. So they do need that predominant central player, certainly with the likes of Kai Gill and others stepping away from the sport, and they're far thinner than they would have been maybe a season or two ago. You kind of already highlighted game week 5. It's huge. And for me, it's fairly simple. If they perform like they have across game weeks 3 and 4, they are probably favourites to get themselves out of those bottom 2 placements. They'll be looking to drag sides like Manchester City, potentially even GBG Saracens, into that relegation picture, which makes it fascinating. So overall, another fantastic weekend for Hull and East Yorkshire. Tyler McClelland, of course, featured in the Fantasy Team of the Weekend for the second time in a row. So it shows that he's getting that acknowledgement and recognition from his peers as well. But anyone with a set of eyes knows just how good he is and how great his impact has been. Next up, we have Manchester City in 10th with 14 points, also from 18 games played. They're another side that has shown real development from earlier in the season. They're picking up points, they're competing in games, and importantly, they're doing just enough, at the moment anyway, to keep themselves clear of the relegation zone. So just for context, we keep saying relegation zone. Whoever finishes the season in 11th and 12th is technically relegated from the Championship, but then they are, of course, invited to compete in the 26-27 playoff, where teams from across the country, regional league teams who have stated a wish, a desire to compete in the National League are drawn together. And then the format of that day is dictated by how many teams enter. So it will see whoever finishes 11th and 12th have to play for their Championship football on Saturday, June the 6th at Nottingham Trent University. But just back to City, I've said a few times I wasn't sure how they would adjust to the absence of Jay Pixton, but the inclusion of Jack Humphreys, another incredibly impactful signing, has been inspired. He fills a huge void, gives them a proper outlet in the centre, and you can see the impact he's having on the wider group. If we look at their results, it was a bit of a tale of two halves across the weekend. Saturday was excellent, 3 games unbeaten, and not easy ones either. A 0-0 draw with Teesside Steel, where they looked comfortable and well organised against one of the strongest teams in the division. A really solid 1-0 win over Norwich City, which was very hard fought and deserved, and then a 0-0 draw with Hull and East Yorkshire, who came into the weekend in probably the strongest form of most of the teams in the division. So you couldn't have asked for much more from those three games. Sunday, however, told a slightly different story. 2 defeats and fairly clear ones as well. 4-0 loss to Manchester rivals Manchester United, probably their heaviest defeat in some time. I don't recall the last time they lost a game by that sort of margin. And then a 2-0 loss to Altrincham. Whether that's fatigue, the demands of the weekend, or just the level of the opposition stepping up, it was a bit of a drop off from what we've come to expect. Greg, give me your assessments on Manchester City.
Yeah, you said another impactful signing, Jack Humphreys. He was at the heart of everything they did, and you rightfully say it was a real weekend of two halves, because Saturday they were excellent. From what I've gathered of the Teesside Steel game, first game on a Saturday, rode the luck a little bit in the first half, but second half they got together, were resolute, and just really frustrated Teesside Steel, and got that 0-0 that they probably deserved, and they'd been chuffed to bits with that. And then to back that up with a crucial victory, you gotta say crucial victory against Norwich, just from how it's panned out and the results that Hull are getting and GBG Saracens got. Again, that 3 points against a team that are, mid-table, we're looking to potentially get a late charge with playoff spot, would do them the world of good. And then that 0-0 draw with Hull and East Yorkshire meant they didn't lose ground to them. I would say they probably just about edged it. So they were feeling confident. They'd have been aware that the Manchester United game was probably going to be beyond them from a win point of view. They would have hoped for a 0-0 draw like they got against Teesside Steel. And if they were going to lose, not to lose by many. I think that just again showed Manchester United's quality when they get it right. I think it'll be the Altrincham result that probably disappoints them the most out of all of them. Having had such a good weekend, and they'd have seen it as, again, a game against a team in the mid-table that they could easily have got a draw against. So to come out with that 2-0 defeat would feel like a bitter pill to swallow as they left and drove home on that Sunday afternoon. But I don't think they can detract from what was a really positive Saturday, and that's what they've got to take going into Gameweek 5, because again, they have some crucial games in their hopes to avoid having to use that playoff spot. Now, I looked at Sunday, and we've already said, GBG Saracens at 11:35, and that game against Nottingham Forest at 3:05, last game of the season. That Saracens game could end up being a cliche, relegation 6-pointer, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It will. I think one thing that stood out to me was the consistency in their selection. We've spoken at length following the VARs, Game Week 3, about performance versus participation when it comes to City. What do they want to get from this division? And for the first time, certainly from what I've seen, they've got something close to a settled starting four, and that's given them continuity, chemistry, a bit more identity in how they play. Oscar Spink has stepped into that Jay Pixton role brilliantly. Jack Humphreys has taken over centrally, and then Lucas Vezra-O'Brien and Kareem Ali out wide. That unit played the majority of the minutes across Saturday. And it does mean players like Sebastian Spink, Stephen Miller-Whittaker are seeing reduced minutes, which is tough, but it feels like a necessary trade-off at the moment. Oscar gives them more defensively, and with classification constraints and Jack in that central role being a PF2, it limits how much they can rotate their side. You add Jay Pixton back into that group alongside Jack and potentially a wing pairing of Oscar and Seb, suddenly you're talking about a really good side. But right now, without Jay, it's about finding the balance that gives them the best chance of staying up. And I think the coaches have got it spot on. Jack Humphreys, outstanding, was voted unsung hero of the weekend and fully deserved as well. You can see what he brings, the standards, the leadership, the composure. And I've already said in that game against Hull, going up against Tyler McClelland, he didn't just hold his own, he arguably got the better of that battle at times, which tells you everything about his level. The concern for me is it's very defensive. 3 clean sheets on Saturday is impressive, but they've only scored 1 goal across the entire weekend. And across the entirety of the season, they're averaging just over half a goal a game on WFA scoreline. You can go to team stats, and I think they're on 0.56 goals per game, which means everything is built on not conceding, and that's a dangerous dynamic when you're at the bottom. That works to a point, of course it does, but if they get into situations in game week 5 where they have to take the game to teams, that's where the questions come. Because at the moment, their superior goal difference, or superior defence, it should be said, over Hull is what's keeping them above the relegation zone. So the task for game week 5 is fairly simple. Match Hull's points and they stay up. But the fixtures don't make it easy. Villa Rockets Lions still have aspirations of that 3rd place playoff. West Bromwich Albion Baggies and GBG Saracens, I'm sure we'll both agree when we highlight them in more detail, Greg, 2 of the best, most exciting teams in the division at the moment. And then Nottingham Forest, who we've already highlighted. They're all competitive games, always something on the line. So it's fine. I think it's finely balanced. Structurally, they're solid. We know that. Defensively, they're stronger than the teams around them. But if it comes down to needing goals, needing to chase games, that's where we'll really find out if they've got enough to stay clear of that playoff position. Do you agree?
Yeah. What I would say is, to your point, I think what's the understated thing about Jack signing is just that experience he's brought to the team and that tactical knowledge of being in the lead system. He's flourished playing in that middle by himself, almost trying to just orchestrate everything from Manchester City point of view, adding him with a little bit of coaching. It's been really good to see. I'm pleased for him on a personal level. He seems to be enjoying it so much, taking on that challenge. Yeah, like I said, match holds points, they'll stay up. Simple as that. For me, even if they end up in the playoff, they've got far too much quality to to go think about that, even not coming out of the playoff for the spot in the championship next season. And like you say, when Jay's back, that 4 you've just mentioned, they're in a real, looking much more above them than they are below them sort of situation next season. So lots of positives to take. They've just got to not dwell on the Sunday too much, which is difficult because obviously it comes after all the good you did on Saturday. But just look back at Saturday and go, you know what, yes, defensively we're solid. We're much more solid. Are we going to struggle to score? Possibly. You think about, going into games against that Forest game, like you said, both games happening at the same time. If Hull get a goal on court B, for example, you then got to go switch into, right, we need a goal now, because if we don't, we're dropping below them. You've got to match what happens on the opposite court. Can they do that? Can they switch into, we need to get a goal now, we need to start throwing the kitchen sink at it? That remains to be seen. But multiple positives to take from Man City, and they'll be pleased with how it's going.
I think if you assess Manchester City and their identity in years gone by, or certainly since they've been a competing National League side, the priority list at the top is trying not to lose, underneath which is trying to win. And just to go back to Jack Humphreys, I think he's trying to switch them round. He wants them to attack games. He wants them to be brave and win games. Prioritize that over being defensive, being stubborn, because I could sense a little bit of frustration after games because there's a slightly contrasting instructions from Jack on the court and their coaches on the sideline as to what they're actually trying to do. If they align that priority, align that expectation, they could be really exciting. But they have the personnel to challenge games and try and win games. But it does come at the risk of the opposition attacking and having success. But the whole division is risk versus reward. It's just how brave you want to be in committing players forward. And their goal difference shows, or their goal scores, sorry, that the priority still is trying not to lose at the moment. But if Hull and East Yorkshire come flying out the traps in game week 5, Man City are going to have to be brave, and that priority list is going to need winning at the top. So we progress. GBG Saracens in 9th with 19 points from their 18 games played. The Swizzles team of the weekend, and I'll be honest, I think it's probably the team I've been most excited to talk about. Regular listeners will know how highly myself and Gregg rate this group, a young, hungry squad. You can see now how the pieces are starting to fall into place as the season progresses, which is something we always expected would be the case. It was a hectic 5-game weekend against some of the strongest sides in the division. And whilst they did lose twice, they also picked up 2 wins and a draw, which now gives them a really, and I mean really, valuable 5-point buffer over the relegation zone. They started with a 2-0 defeat to Nottinghamshire, which is no disgrace at all against the league leaders, and then bounced back brilliantly with a 3-0 win over Nottingham Forest. I think that was biggest ever National League win, which also saw Tommy Mickelson score the side's first ever league hat-trick in the club's history. Of course, Avery Bazin-Ball scored one in the WFA Cup versus 7/8 Acorns earlier in the season, and he was outstanding across the weekend. Fully deserved his place in the fantasy team of the weekend. He wasn't far off the standout player either, which I'll weave in there quickly. They followed that with a narrow 1-0 defeat to Teesside Still. But even in a game, even in that game, they will feel they could have taken something, which surely tells you everything about where this team is right now. This isn't a side just happy to compete. They expect more. And then Sunday, for me, was excellent. A 1-1 draw with Norwich City, coming from behind. Ollie Grafton dispatching late, and a 1-0 win over Villa Rockets Lion, which highlights their development. Because if you want a stat, Gregg, game week 1 of the season, GBG Saracens Villa saw Villa win 9-0. Fast forward less than 5 months, and Saracens win the reverse fixture. How unbelievable is that?
Yeah, and I've got to remember, because I didn't last time game week 3, did I? This is their first season. And I can wax lyrically about them now, because I was possibly a little bit too harsh in the last recap. And this squad just excites both of us, doesn't it? I mean, their resilience, their ability, their character for such a young squad in their first season, they've not felt daunted about, weekends away in Nottingham, playing against players and teams that have been playing far longer than they've been together. Probably, Norwich City have probably been going for most of the squad to have been alive. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. Nottinghamshire have definitely been going for more than most of the players have been around. So, yeah, it was just brilliant to see. Some of the football they played was excellent. Tommy Mickelson in particular was just the architect and orchestra of the team, pulling the strings. Some of their passages of play were excellent. I did their game uh, against Nottinghamshire, and they had some really good spells. Some of the football they played, there's a couple of moves, and I'm going, you know what, that wouldn't be out of place. Top of the Championship, bottom of the Premiership. I think massive credit has to go to Tom Wilshere and John Dixon, who rightfully were named in the team of the weekend as coaches for just what they're doing with this squad and having to balance, obviously, wanting to win and wanting to learn. I think that's what we said with comparing it to Man City and, not wanting to lose games rather than winning. Saracens going to go, no, we want to win every game. We want to play the nice attacking football. And this is a squad that, like I said, first ever National League season, and they've gone, we're going to come and win games. We're not going to sit back and defend and try and limit our losses and just eke out wins when we can. They're brave. They're really brave with how they play. So credit to the coaching staff. I was chatting to John at Lilleshall on Sunday, because obviously we're both at England Dev Camp squad, and he couldn't be prouder of the team and how they're performing. He was so pleased when he managed to get the results through from after training. So yeah, could wax lyrically about the squad, and they did all of this without everybody's the ball.
Yeah, they certainly did. It was a shame not to see him present, but I'm sure he was tuning in from afar. As you've spoken about, Tommy Mickelson will get the headlines, and rightfully so. He was sensational. But having watched a lot of their games live or after, I don't think their success happens without Ollie Grafton. I think he was brilliant. His positioning, his discipline, the way he operates out wide, switching play, preventing 2-on-1s. He's such an important part of how they function. And going forward, his positional play means he gets chances, a lot of them. Across the weekend, he probably had a cumulative 20, maybe even 30 attempts. And I know only a couple of them went in, which isn't a great success rate if you break it down like that. But if he sharpens and gets better in that final intention and final action, improving his timing, his anticipation, his execution, he's a player that could easily hit 15 or 20 goals in a season. And it's only his fourth weekend at National League level. So who knows where he could be in 12, 18 months, 2 years' time. More broadly, I think you've touched on it, but how cohesive the group is. You look across the squad, Mickelson, Body, Basing Ball, Sevenoaks, Ebanks, they're developing together, they're improving together, and you can see the belief growing and the mentality shift. And we spoke about it with Manchester City. The ultimate objective is to not lose, and then if they win, it's an additional bonus. That's not the case with GBG Saracens. They will go into every game thinking they can win, which is an incredible mentality to have when the average age has got to be, what, 15, 16 at best. So a huge shout out to John Dixon and Tom Wilshere, named coaches of the weekend, because they've clearly got this group moving in the right direction. And obviously, yourself and John weren't present on the Sunday, so I saw Rich Mickelson on the touchline really assisting Tom as well. So it's just a really good feel-good factor around the whole team. Looking ahead to Gameweek 5, they've got Altrincham, Leeds Dynamos, Manchester City and Hull in East Yorkshire. So they avoid the very top sides in the division. And all of those fixtures around them are against teams at the lower to mid-level. So we've spoken about the points needed this season, 18, 19, 20. Saracens are already there. So realistically, they've probably already done enough to ensure their spot in the 26-27 season. However, they will not rely on that. They will want to push on, add more points and finish the season strongly, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, they're 4 points off Dynamos, and you play them in Game Week 5. 4 points off Baggies, who are playing really well. 6 off Altrincham, and they played them in Game Week 5. I mean, results go their way. You look at a team in their first season with the young squad that are finishing 6th or 7th. So yeah, unbelievably good work. They just seem to be. It's refreshing because they're going for wins. They're a young squad. They're playing really nice football, and they just look to be enjoying it. So you see them off the court after a game. They're all together. They're just so together. They're loving it. They're absolutely loving it, and it's just a joy to watch.
I'll say with confidence that they will finish the season with either 24, 25 points. I reckon they've got at least 2 wins, and maybe even a draw in the final weekend. If they get that win in their first fixture of game week 5 against Altrincham, it pretty much guarantees their safety. So then they can play with a bit more freedom. I assume Avery will be back. And then they finish the season with a high and take all that confidence, all that momentum into their semi-final matchup in the Jonga Group WFA Vars, where they have a very credible opportunity to lift silverware come season's end. So congratulations to GBG Saracens, a fantastic weekend, and long may it continue. Next in the standings, in 8th, we've got Leeds Dynamos. 23 points from their 18 games. And I think it's probably fair to say it was a frustrating weekend for them. They're clearly a side in transition, player departures, coaching changes. And with all of that, naturally comes a shift in expectations. There's still a solid championship outfit, but one that over the last 3 or 4 seasons hasn't quite been able to force themselves into that promotion conversation ever, I don't think. And that same trend has shown again this season, that it's the lack of consistency that has hurt them. 3 losses and a win in game week 4 is below what they would have expected. They opened with a narrow 2-1 defeat to Altrincham, probably the one fixture across the weekend where they would have really targeted points, and then followed that up with a 3-0 defeat to Manchester United in a game that United did what they do so well, that they pick their moments, they don't over exert themselves, and when those moments come, they were clinical, and Leeds just couldn't deal with that. Sunday was a different story. They went up against Teesside Steel, who you would expect to respond after that defeat to Hull. And early on, it looked like that may be the case. Teesside started really well, applied pressure, but Leeds weathered the storm brilliantly, and it turned into one of the most intriguing, cagey games of the weekend. It was a real pleasure to commentate on. Harrison Taylor was exceptional for me. Such an underrated player. People still see him as an attacking wide player, but the way he operated in that game and across the weekend for that matter, almost as kind of a defensive winger, he was outstanding. He supported Liam Chadwick centrally, breaking up the play, blocking the passing lanes, forcing Teesside into areas they didn't want to go. He reminds me of Jack Hassan, and regular listeners will know how much I rate him and his style of play. And I saw shades of that in Harrison Taylor. And if that wasn't enough, he capped it off with the decisive moment of the fixture, perfectly executed, kick in on the side, power, precision, straight through the Teesside defence, where it met Reece Stewart, who was unopposed at the back post, who finished brilliantly. So it was deserved, and you could see Teesside were desperately trying to adapt, switch things up, but they couldn't find a way through. They couldn't break that shape of Leeds Dynamo. So it was a deserved win, their first win of the weekend. And sadly, that momentum didn't carry over against Baggies, where they lost 2-0. Greg, give me your assessment.
Yeah, it's another one of those teams where you balance the sort of desire to go and win a game with the desire to not lose it, for me. That transition from the coaching preference of Dan Rigby and Lewis Harris to play an expansive style of football and, be really brave and really go and attack a game. Now with Jack Maxwell and Paul Gorman in charge, I feel that with what they've got player profile wise and at their disposal, they've transitioned to let's make sure we're defensively solid, and tough to break down. and then go on to try and, if we can, get a goal. So I think they've switched from a desire to win every game to a desire not to lose every game. From the outside looking in, is how it seemed, because I was watching, I had a couple of their games. I had their game against Altrincham on the Saturday, and yeah, it just everything from an attacking sense was going through Chadwick in the middle, who is having coming up against them at regionals, is a real pain in the backside to get around. Really tough dribbler, and can generate a lot of power on the full spin. But they were very difficult to break down across the weekend in a lot of their games. They find themselves in 8th, level on goal difference as well with Baggy. So I'm assuming it's gone down to the goals scored that's been their undoing, or even their head-to-head, because obviously they lost to Baggies. So that's why they find themselves below Baggies. And we're not used to talking about Dynamos this far down the table as sort of look at past couple of seasons. So they are a team in transition through losing player personnel, Jack Humphreys, switching your coaching staff, switching mentality perhaps, just to make sure that they are picking up points, if not more often than they're picking up maybe 3 points and 0 points. If you get my drift, they're quite happy to keep getting a point in most games rather than sometimes getting 3, sometimes getting 0.
Yeah, I think just to answer some of your points, it's a more superior goals scored for West Bromwich Albion Baggies, but I don't want to jump ahead because I want to break down that element, the goals scored and goals conceded, because when you break it down and look at West Bromwich Albion Baggies in more detail, it is a fairly ridiculous story. But back to Leeds, I I think they almost just want to press that big reset button. Player departures, coaching departures, as already mentioned, has really halted their momentum. And this is a team that has historically really struggled for that consistency. And I think the tale of their weekend, that the fact that they can go and win against Teesside Steel, one of only 2 teams to get victory over them in the last nearly 2 years, but it doesn't carry over, because in that final game against West Bromwich Albion Baggies, an early goal killed all momentum. I think they're trying to peel away from that dribbling style of football, but personnel slightly restricts it. So we'll have to see how and if they recruit again in the summer, because they just need a bit of continuity. They need some consistency, because there's flashes of brilliance. They were testing and trialing who was playing goalkeeper across the weekend. It was a position rotated constantly between Hayden Lambert and Reece Stewart. I don't even think the coaches are quite sure which pairing with Liam Chadwick is quite the best. Now, as we've already alluded to, in terms of the table, they're not in any danger. But there is still something to play for. That middle pack is so tight. They're level on points with Baggies. They're just behind Altrincham. They're within touching distance, when you break it down, of Norwich City and Villa. And if we look at game week 5, they've got fixtures against Hull and East Yorkshire, GBG Saracens, Norwich City, and Villa Rockets Lions. So there's a real opportunity there to push into that top half and finish the season strongly, because whilst relegation isn't a concern, momentum still matters. And for Leeds, it's about finishing with some consistency, not just flashes of it. Next in the standings, in 7th, we've got West Bromwich Albion Baggies, and they're probably my favourite team at the moment in the division. 5 points from 5 games might not sound ideal on paper, but when you add the context, it's actually a really solid return. The irony is, the one game you'd back them to get something from, against Hull and East Yorkshire, is the one they actually ended up losing. And that was largely down to that Tyler McClelland masterclass. After that, however, they faced first and second in the division in Nottinghamshire and Manchester United, respectively. And I don't know, I think you've called both of them, Greg. I don't know what it is about Baggies against Manchester United, but it's always delivers. In game week 3, it took a moment of magic from David D to separate them. And this time it was even tighter. A 2-2 draw where Baggies gave as good as they got. Jack Gorder stepping up with a brace, including that late equaliser just as United thought they nicked it. It was ridiculous. I'm gutted I wasn't able to call either of them. Give me your assessments on Baggies as a whole and then that fixture in more detail.
Yeah, Baggies are one of my favourite teams to watch because they just, I said it in game week 3, you can see the West Brom DNA. The football they play at times is sublime. It really is. The passing ability of the team, they link up so well. Noah Stevenson Lee is fast becoming one of my favourite players in the division. Rightfully got a spot in the team of the weekend. And it was just a real joy to watch again. I know that loss against Huntley Shorts were really frustrated. Matt Gilbert and Dave Lewis, their coaches, they didn't play anywhere near their best apparently. But they rebounded so well. If I could honestly commentate any fixture over and over again, it'd be West Brom champion Bangers and Manchester United. I've had the luxury and the joy of doing both of them this season, and in the games of regionals have been exactly the same. Apparently, it was crazy. It was honestly crazy. I really can't describe it. The Baggies took a lead. Manchester United got one back straight away through a finish from Neil Fitzpatrick that, yes, he will claim possibly he meant it. Definitely didn't. It was going in. It went in at the far post, completely deceiving swinger and defence. And then it was back and forth. Both teams played open attacking football. Manchester United thought they'd snatched it at the end of the 37th minute. And then Baggies hit them back. A minute later, Gowder getting an equaliser that just summed up the game. It's just a joy to watch. Ryan, next season, if Manchester United look like they're going to be in the Premiership, don't they? So I'm disappointed we're not going to have that next season, to be honest.
Let's hope they meet each other in the cup because Manchester United look destined for the top flight.
Yeah, we're going to have to hope for a cup draw because I've completely forgotten. Manchester United flying their way to the top division, but you can have to beat yourself on it if we do have a cup draw because they're a joy to watch. But Baggies, like I said, they're playing some really sublime football when it works. Their goals scored category is really, really high. And I think that's what we're seeing from West Brom is, they're scoring 1.6 a game according to the scoreline app. They're conceding 1.7 a game. So I mean, from a commentary point of view, you're guaranteed action.
That's exactly it. They're one of the most balanced attacking sides in the division. I think every outfield player of theirs has scored this season. I think only Amy Sherman hasn't, and most of them have 3, 4, 5 goals plus, which makes them so hard to defend against and also gives Dave Lewis and Matt Gilbert a real headache when it comes to selecting a starting 4. But it's a good problem to have. The contrast that you've just spoken about. They've scored 31 goals this season, which is the 4th best in the league, more than Forest, Hull and Manchester City combined, and then some. But they've also conceded 33, which is the 4th highest in the division. And for a team sitting in 7th, that is quite a stat. They're exciting, they're open, they back themselves to outscore their teams. Shades of Ange Postecoglou in the professional running game, who just wants to outscore them, even at the detriment of a solid defence. The irony of that, or probably telling, is their 0-0 draw with Nottinghamshire on Sunday morning. Their previous goalless draw in the National League was in April 2024. They've gone on 46 games without a stalemate, which is remarkable when you consider they're not typically a dominant side, but it shows how unusual that result was. If we break down players individually, Jack Gorder, I love him as a player, plays with real heart, real emotion. At times that can work against him because he's hard on himself. But his positional play and his finishing are improving again. And we're starting to see that level from a couple of seasons ago where he hit 15 goals and 5 assists. He's on 6 goals and 4 assists now, so double digits for contributions. And you look at Gameweek 5, there's every chance he could push that even further. I would set him the challenge of finish on 10 plus goals. I don't think that's unrealistic. Sam Swingler developing into a really solid National League player, versatile, technically solid. I like him in that goalkeeper jersey. Lewis Marshall had one of his best weekends in quite some time. And then there's Noah Stevenson-Lee. For me, what he's doing is just different. We've seen players come into this league, score goals, have an impact. I'm thinking straight away Tanvir Hussain, who sits on 18 goals currently. Last season, it was Oscar Smedley, who produced unprecedented numbers for a National League debutant. But Noah's impact is about his influence. He's dictating play. He's being relied on by a very experienced group, and he's delivering consistently. 3 fantasy team of the weekend inclusions already, a standout player award, another where he was a vote or two off getting it again. If Baggies finish the season strongly, there is no reason whatsoever why he shouldn't be in the conversation for some of the top individual honours. Standout player, young player of the season. It will be so hotly contested because as we go through the division, Manchester United has some incredible players that we will no doubt talk about, Altrincham and others. So it's intriguing, but we tend to see those individual accolades heavily tied up with leagues finishes and team placements, which is where Baggies will now need to raise their level to hopefully do a service to some of their individuals. And if we look ahead to Gameweek 5, they've got Manchester City, Altrincham, Teesside Steel and Norwich City. On current form, all of those are very competitive fixtures, and for me, all potentially winnable. And they'll be looking to finish top of that middle pack of teams, West Bromwich Albion, Baggies, potentially pushing into 5th, maybe even 4th if other results go their way. Because whilst they're not in the promotion conversation or the 3rd place playoff conversation, there's still a strong finish there to be had.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is just every single player that comes on, whoever starts, whoever comes on off the bench, they're all making an impact. There were Harvey, Jack Westmoreland, Lewis Marshall, Jack Gowder. Wherever they play on the wings, Noah Stevenson-Lee has got a chemistry with all of them and is finding assists and goals with whoever he has available to him on the wings. Swingley, like you say, is becoming a really dependable National League goalkeeper. Just gives him a rock at the back. The thing for me, and I mentioned this on commentary when I covered the Baggies Manchester United game, was where does the conversation happen with Noah Stevenson-Lee around at what point is he ready for a move through the system at West Brom to Throssels? Now, whether a spot opens up at Throssels in the off-season, who knows? There's loads of what ifs. But where does the conversation happen? Like, is he ready now? Is he better off having another season at Championship, become more consistent, producing better numbers? Where do you see it, Ryan? That's where I'm intrigued.
I will never get involved with where a player should be operating, whether it's Premiership or Championship. I'm going to sit on the fence here because it's not my place to comment on player transfers. What I will say, however, is as long as he's prioritising minutes, whether that's with Baggies in the Championship or maybe one of the sister clubs of West Bromwich Albion in the Premiership, as long as he is getting the same amount of minutes he is currently, that is the priority. That is the non-negotiable. So I don't know. We will come season's end. We will see season's end where he's playing his football, or at the start of next, he is Premiership quality. There's no question about that. Anyone and everyone can see that. Um, but he's got so much time on his side, and he could spend a year or two developing into one of the standout players in the Championship, assuming Manchester United get promoted, which is the expectation. As soon as Mason Davies and David D are taking out this division, you'd probably, based on 25-26 standards, have Noah the top of the list. So he can be right in the headlines for the foreseeable future. How do you see it then?
But I was only obviously basing it on the fact that obviously Tyler still plays in the Championship, and if we're assuming if we're gonna, in this world, assume he decides to either try his luck in the Premiership and really test himself, or then yes, I would have Noah top of the tree. That was my only slight hesitation, was considering Tyler still being in the division. But yeah, the reason I bring up the question about is he ready for, like, where's he going to play this season with Arsenal, is because he's obviously Premiership ready. Anyone could see that when they watch him play. But like you say, I agree. Prioritizing minutes has to be the key for his development. There is nothing wrong with carrying on as you are, because you're doing a fantastically sterling job, and you could really, as they grow together, Baggies, they could easily next season be looking at a team that is ready to challenge for a playoff spot. If they're going together, I think that's the good thing and the bad thing about the system that West Brom have. The good thing is there is a ready-made, processing line of players that are ready to come up and be promoted. And they've got more than just 3 teams in the National League. They'll have teams competing at regional level that their players then get promoted back into Baggies, and so on and so forth. The issue is obviously there's no real consistency and no time to build a team that gels together, because it gets disrupted a lot. Whereas if there's not many options or not gaps in the Throstle side, that leaves Noah with an option to say, you know what, we'll all grow together. I'm happy here. I'm getting minutes. That's really good for my development, so on and so forth.
You look at some of the players that have come through that Baggy squad, up to Throstle, through to Albion. You wonder if they could have kept hold of some of those players for 12, 18 months longer. Baggies would almost certainly be a Premiership side now. This is a potential Premiership competing side, but they have to keep that squad together.
What's the regulation around having 3 teams in one division?
They're allowed to. So if West Bromwich Albion Baggies were to go up via automatic or the playoff situation, they would, of course, be permitted to compete in the Premiership alongside their 2 sister clubs. But the regulations now restrict 2 or more teams competing in the National League at the same time. So because they were present and a mainstay prior to that regulation changing, they're absolutely fine. But they can go up. But I do feel for Dave Lewis and Matt Gilbert, because the moment their players start impressing is the moment the spotlight from the Premiership shines brightest on them. So now let's progress to Altrincham in 6th, 18 games played, 25 points. For me, this was very much a weekend of what could have been. They sit on that 25 points, but the focus here is probably more on the games they dropped points in rather than the ones they won. I don't think it's unfair to say they could and probably should have taken more from Gameweek 4. Dropping points against Nottingham Forest and Villa Rockets Lions, 2 sides based on recent form certainly they would have expected to beat, means they missed the opportunity to really climb the table. If those results go differently, you're potentially looking at a side pushing into 4th, maybe even applying pressure above that. Instead, they remain sick. They opened with that defeat to Nottingham Forest, which will be the one that really frustrates them. They went 1-0 up. They looked in control, but they just couldn't build on it. Forest grew into the game, found confidence and turned it around. They did respond well, however. A 2-1 win over Leeds Dynamos, a really competitive game against a stubborn side, showed their quality. 1-0 defeat to Villa Rockets Lions, Villa's only win of the weekend, which is another that probably got away from them, but they finished strongly with a 2-0 win over Manchester City, which is really impressive given how difficult City are to break down. Goals from James Simpson and Jack Hassan. A good way to close out the weekend. Greg, give me your assessments on Alti. That is, by the way, that's completely taken over the National League and anyone in and around Manchester. It is exclusively Alti now.
Yeah, I didn't really have an option because I was doing commentary with David D, and so every time it was Alter, Alter. I've probably just offended the entire city of Manchester there. So apologies for that. But yeah, I like to say, a weekend of what could have been. Following on from a really positive game week 3, to open up with defeat to the bottom side, Nottingham Forest would have felt like an absolute gut punch, especially going 1-0 up so early on. That they thought, yeah, we've got a goal, we've got the breakthrough, let's build on it. So to come out of it with nothing would have just felt, yeah, like I said, a bit of a gut punch. They did follow up by getting a win against Leeds Dynamos, a game that like I said, I called Joey Levine with a double. A really talented player for me, really exciting. Ultimately, a squad that just, again, is filled with exciting players. Jack Johnson, Joey Levine, James Simpson. There really is a lot of quality in that squad. Jake Hudson at the back, Jack Hassan off the bench. It's a squad of J's, isn't it? It's a commentator's nightmare, that squad. Trying to remember whose J is whose. But like I say, yeah, a weekend of what could have been. Because you say, get the win against Nottingham Forest, get a win against Villa Rockets Lions, who are form-wise not there. They're on 31 points, and with the fall of Teesside still, which we'll get onto, yeah, they'd have played a game more, but they'd be saying, you know what, we've got a chance here of sneaking into this playoff spot. So whether it's too soon for them in the playoff spot could be argued, but they're really developing into a team that is threatening the teams above them if they can find that consistency. One thing, as I said in game week 3, that's always pleasing on the eye is a perfectly balanced goals scored and goals against. They have a goal difference of 0. Nice and perfectly balanced.
You like that, don't you?
It's just pleasing on the eye. I mean, obviously you want a goal difference like, Nottinghamshire's of 35. But having as Thanos says, perfectly balanced as all things should be, it's quite pleasing on the eye.
With Alti, it comes down to expectation, doesn't it? We don't necessarily expect them to challenge for a title or automatic promotion, but there's no reason why they can't be targeting them. Even with those key departures over the last few months, they're still an incredibly strong side. The structure, the discipline, the way they approach games, it's all there. But to your point, it's just missing that extra bit of consistency. Individually, there's plenty to like. Joey Levine, to your point, had a fantastic weekend, probably his best ever in the National League. The brace against Leeds Dynamos was fantastic, and they've needed someone to step up in that attacking role following Mason Davies' departure. James Simpson off the mark. Following his move from Manchester City, Jack Hassan continues to be a really important player. But for me, their standout was Jack Johnson, still very inexperienced at this level, but you wouldn't know it. He was excellent in the centre. He's a really exciting player, and he's involved in the Regional Emergent Talent Programme as well. So there's a lot of development still to come from him. Overall, still a very good side, still very competitive. But this weekend is that missed opportunity. If we look ahead to game week 5, they've got GBG Saracens, they've got West Bromwich Albion Baggies, and Hull and East Yorkshire. Certainly the 3 teams that are below them in the standings, but all in very strong form. So it's not straightforward, but if they can pick up 7 to 9 points, they give themselves a real chance of finishing strongly and potentially getting close to their National League points total from last season, which I believe was 35.
Yeah, the thing with me and Jack Johnson is just how calm he is on the ball. He's just, he's sat there, communicate with his team, chewing gum. He just seems to be taking it with a bit of breeze. And they seem again another team that just enjoys their football. They play some really nice stuff as well at times. Defensively hard to break down. Yeah, it just they're a play. There's a number of teams here. Baggies, Saracens, Altrincham, and as we get to the top, Manchester United. The teams are just exciting me in the way they play their football. They just need to be like more consistent in games that they now should have been as the expectation rises, and just make sure that they're switched on. There was quite a humorous moment in their game against Dynamos where they scored a goal. They thought they'd scored a goal. The entire team celebrating, went back to their half for a good 30 seconds, only to turn around and realise the referee had given it a free kick, and the puzzled look on every single one of their faces as to go, hang on a second, why has a free kick now been taken by these Dynamos? Was quite hilarious. But yeah, good squad, balanced goal difference. They've got the Boeing record, 7-4-7. 7 wins, 4 draws, 7 defeats.
What is really interesting, which we will talk about in more detail when we get to their sister club, Manchester United, is that is the last game of the season for those two sides. And it could be a potentially season-defining one for the red side of the Greater Manchester Football Club. So a lot of intrigue, a lot of narrative, but regular listeners will know how much of a soft spot I have for Altrincham. And I've got a very impressive international shirt collection from some of the Powerchair superstars across the world. I might have to delve into club level now. So I need a Jack Hassan Altrincham shirt to frame for my office. But no, fantastic stuff. We now progress on to, if I get my notes up, Norwich City in 5th with 27 points from 17 games. And this is an interesting one because I've been really positive about Norwich on this podcast, not just in the Championship, but the Vars as well, where they've got a genuine chance of lifting the inaugural trophy in May. But Gameweek 4 was very underwhelming for me, not necessarily because of the results, but more because of the performances. If you go back to Gameweek 1, they were brave, expansive, really took the game to teams. And as the weeks have gone on, they've just become more and more conservative, whether that's a conscious change or opposition starting to figure them out. It's definitely shifted because Saturday didn't go their way. A narrow defeat to Manchester City, a game that could have easily gone the other way, including a missed penalty late on, which would have salvaged a point. Then a loss to Villa Rockets Lions. I didn't catch that one, but based on previous results, including their Vars win over Villa, where they won 3-1, and the earlier league victory where they won 1-0, you would have had Norwich favourites in that one. Instead, Villa get their first win, certainly in a WFA competition, since November, which is a crazy kind of stat and sums up kind of how the game went for Norwich. Sunday, a little bit better. 1-1 draw with GBG Saracens, which is actually a good point given Saracens' form and how tough they've been to break down. And then a 2-0 win over Nottingham Forest to finish the weekend with goals from Jack Fulcher and Johan George. So overall, certainly not disastrous, but it felt like they never quite hit the level we know they can reach. What are your assessments, Greg?
Yeah, I don't really know what to say here, to be honest. It's one of those, it's like, you've got the excitement, we've gone through a couple of teams there where there's excitement, Baggies, Saracens, Altrincham, and then you get to Norwich and you're like, the excitement kind of drops a little bit. They're not hitting the level we know they can. They've got the quality there. It just doesn't seem to be clicked. They're not as expansive. They're not as, free flowing. It's not really clicking. But I just don't know where they really go, because you look at it, they're 8 points off the playoff spot. And yes, they've got, fixtures. Their opening fixture on the opening day of Gameweek 5 is 9:30, first game, Teesside Steel. That could be a massive game in terms of their playoff hopes, because, Win that, they're only 4 points behind. Sorry, 5 points behind. My maths is terrible. But then it gives them some momentum. Lose that, and the season kind of dissipates into mid-table mediocrity. They've got some difficult fixtures in Gameweek 5. Teesside Steel, Nottinghamshire, Hull East Yorkshire, Leeds Dynamos, West Brom Challenge Baggies. I mean, Teesside still got onto their form's dropped off, but Nottinghamshire, Hull East Yorkshire, we've already said no one wants to face. Leeds Dynamos, I'd probably say they can get a draw, possibly a win out of. Baggies are anyone's guess, because if Baggies really click, Norwich will be exposed. So a side that at the beginning promised a lot competing at the top, as I said, are in danger of really dissipating to nothing, a mid-table mediocrity from a league standing. Yes, their hopes will then turn to the Vars and going, can we sort of make a positive out of this and win some silverware? Am I being too harsh, Ryan?
Not necessarily. I just want to see them be a little bit braver. Now, prior to the season kicking off, I did the championship prediction episode with Rosie Hodgson, and it's one of the few times where I've done a predictions podcast, and most of what I predicted is coming to fruition. And if I assess how I deemed the league to finish, I did have Norwich finishing 8th. So a slight deviation from where they are currently in 5th, but not by a great deal of points. So based on that, I think they're exceeding expectation. And I think they're probably exceeding the majority of people's expectation, because not many people would have had them kind of challenging towards the top. Or certainly challenging towards the third place playoff or the 4th position approaching game week 5. But again, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but I really like their shape. I like the fact that Hannah Murgatroyd operates really high. She hovers around the halfway line almost exclusively when they're in attack and they're in possession, but they don't use her. It is so frustrating. There was a moment in their game against GBG Saracens where Mike Coleman took a set piece, played it back to Hannah Murgatroyd, who was unopposed in the centre. She then, as she typically does, has brilliant distribution. She switched the play to the alternate wing, completely splitting the opposition open, and they had a clear goal scoring opportunity. And I said on commentary at the time, that is the blueprint. That is the way they win games. That is the way they impress. But they didn't do it a single other time in any of the games I watched. It's so frustrating because it's so effective. She needs to be more involved. I think she needs to be taking the set pieces, because she's probably the best ball striker out of the Norwich City squad, and it gives them another dimension. If we talk about the wider squad, Mike Coleman was fairly muted. Johan Jord wasn't able to impart some of his influence. Tom Burnett had a very quiet weekend, certainly by the standards he set in game weeks 1, 2, and 3. So I don't think it's unfair, no, Greg, but I'm always left thinking there's more to be had. They're playing at 50, 60%. Why don't they just really go for it? There is no jeopardy in this season for them. They're probably not going to catch the teams at the top. I don't even know if they want to catch the teams at the top, because they had a really tough time in the Premiership. So why not, in game week 5, just really throw caution to the wind, play brave, expansive football, even if it means making your defence vulnerable and potentially losing games in sloppy fashion.
So the lack of use of Hannah Murgatroyd in a attacking sense baffled you. I've been reminded of the most baffling moment I have possibly ever experienced in a Powerchair Football sense, and I've seen a lot of Powerchair Football. So is the person that was on commentary with me, Rick and Shah. Their game is Villa Rockets Lions, right? Villa Rockets Lions were 2-0 up, 38th minute, and they were comfortable. I mean, it was we said it on commentary, this game is just descending into, it's just meandering to its foregone conclusion, and it had been for a while. And all of a sudden, Norwich get a goal out of nowhere. Jack Fulcher scores, 2 minutes left, 2-1 down. And at that point, Rick and I on commentary, I'm going, They have got one back, trying to build up some momentum, trying to big up, what could be a entertaining last 2 minutes. There was nothing from Norwich. I mean, not a peep of the coaches go, yeah, come on, encouragement, enthusiastic. There was nothing from the players. The sports all kind of just went silent. And it was the most weirdest thing. There was nothing from them in terms of enthusiasm or encouragement to try and get back in the game and realise they had a chance of salvaging a point. They then took Johan George off after getting one back and took him off and then conceded straight away. And it was just completely, I was looking at Ricky and going, have you ever seen something like this before where the team has scored with a couple of minutes left to give themselves a chance to get a game and yet the atmosphere is flatlined? And I mean completely flatlined. I cannot describe how weird and strange it was. It just didn't sit right with me.
Do you think they need a more established coach? I think that's what it is. What I would like to see is Rosie Hodgson back on the touchline, because in an instance like that, she's not going to settle for a loss. She's going to throw caution to the wind. So I don't know whether or not anyone from the Norwich City squad tune into this podcast, but go for it in game week 5. There's no reason not to. There really isn't. If there is a point to be had, if there is 3 points to be had, put everything you can into getting it, because there is no jeopardy. There is no risk. If we look at game week 5, it is a tough run in. Teesside Steel, Nottinghamshire, Hull and East Yorkshire, Leeds Dynamos and West Bromwich Albion Baggies. If it's not the opponents, it's the quantity of games. But realistically, catching Teesside Steel will be a stretch, but there's every chance of they can push for Villa in 4th, and maybe with a little less pressure and a little bit more freedom, we can see them almost take the shackles off again and play with some of the bravery we saw early in the season. And that's the frustrating thing. We know they can do it, but they're just not brave enough in continuing to do it. So let's progress. In 4th, we've got Villa, Rockets, Lions, and I think it's fair to say that this is a side that in some ways will be looking forward to the end of what has been a very turbulent campaign. It started with so much promise, title aspirations, expectations, but things started to fall away after game week 2, both in the league, both in the cup and the Vase as well, and they've struggled to find that level ever since. This weekend, though, it showed glimpses of what they're capable of. It was a 2-0 defeat to Nottinghamshire, which isn't a bad result when you consider the level they're operating at defensively, but the response was important. A win over Norwich, their first in a WFA competition since November, as mentioned. Tanvir Hussain stepping up again with a hat-trick. He's having an outstanding season, 18 goals now, which is an incredible return. Realistically, it's hard to see anyone catching him from here. Kieran Wade and Mason Davies both on 12 apiece, but I never rule anything out. He also followed that up with a winner against Altrincham. So back-to-back wins, something they've struggled to find consistently recently, but that narrow 1-0 defeat to GW4 Saracens, which is frustrating given the momentum they had started to build on. Gregg, give me your assessments of Villa, Rockets, Lions.
Yeah, we were rightfully very critical of them after game week 3 because it was a pretty abysmal showing in game week 3, wasn't it? And putting the Nottinghamshire result aside, because obviously Nottinghamshire are top of the table. Norwich, they were comfortable in the entire game. Tanvir Hussain getting 2, had them in control. Yes, they conceded, but then Norwich decided to just not throw anything at it. And they got a third to make sure that they, stay switched on, and Tanvir getting his hat-trick. And you're right if you say no one's going to catch him. I think that's a good going to catch him, a top goal scorer. Follow that up with another victory, and you think, what, chances are emerging. Maybe there's some sort of momentum building, and then it comes to a screeching halt again. Just when you thought they were over that slump, they're over the hill, but starting to get back to a Villa Rockets team that is going to be ready to push Teesside Steel for that playoff in game week 5, they can lose to Saracens, and it just brings it back down again, doesn't it? Because if they win that, they're only 3 points off Teesside still. Momentum and form-wise, they're 2 teams that are going in opposite directions, we're saying. And we're sat here going, you know what? Great weekend. 3 wins from 4. Only lost to Nottinghamshire. They're back in the real shout of the playoff. And yet they lose that game. And just shows how close the season has been in the standards. To lose one game, it just changed the entire picture of the weekend, the entire outlook of their season. Because yes, I'm out of the playoff spot shout, but they're just that a little bit further back. They do play, you know, Teesside Steel in that weekend, so they'll be hoping to, beat them, close the gap down. What could have been for Villa, really, isn't it? It really is what could have been this season. Because from a goal scoring point of view, they're still top of the charts of goals per game. They're averaging over 2 a game. It's their goals conceded that's really drifted. You look at they've got the 4th best record. They concede 0.88 a game. But that is a massive gap to the team next below them in terms of better. 3rd best, Manchester United 0.39. That's where it's gone wrong for Villa.
Yeah, exactly that. They built such a fantastic foundation in game weeks 1 and game weeks 2, but it is the question of what could have been, not just for the season as a whole, but even in more detail, the game week 4 performances. If we look at the individual talents, there is quality there. Individual numbers show that. We've already spoken about Tanvir saying looks certain to lift that top goal scorer award. Cian Collins and Naglis Montvillas, I think, are 1 and 2 in the assist rankings. And it shows that even in a difficult season, they've got the players producing a really high level. So whilst team success might not fully reflect what would have hoped for, there's still a chance for individual recognition across the board. But to your point, Greg, the bigger question now is whether they can still influence that race for 3rd. Teesside have had a wobble, and Villa play them in game week 3. If they win that, they close the gap significantly, potentially down to 3 points. And with goal difference currently in their favour, it opens the door slightly. It's still a big ask. It's not impossible, especially if they've got a full squad available. And that's been the difficulty, the lack of consistency in terms of squad selection for Brad Bates and Abigail Bolt. The absence of Ellie Brown was felt in game week 4. So if she's back in April, it adds another dimension. She's, I think, a very solid goalkeeper. And if you look at their wider fixtures, Manchester City, Nottinghamshire, Nottingham Forest and Leeds Dynamo to complement that Teesside Steel win. They're all competitive games, but they're all winnable as well. And that's the thing with Villa. It completely depends which version of them shows up. Because if it's a game week 1 or game week 2 version, you have them finishing 3rd potentially. If it's the one we've seen in game week 3 and across game week 4, you could potentially see Norwich, maybe even Altrincham leapfrogging them in the standings.
Yeah, and it just shows, again, what could have been, because they flew out the traps in game week 1, and everyone thought, my word, they're going to blitz all the records for, the championship standings, goals scored, etc., etc. And it's just fallen off in the middle point. And again, if that Saracens game, if they win that, they're still right within, despite everything that's gone wrong, they're still right within the chance of that playoff spot. They're not out of it by saying, because they could beat Teesside Steel, and Teesside Steel have got some really difficult games, as we'll get onto in game week 5. But what could have been?
I'm excited that Villa versus Teesside is on Court B, is on my beloved Court B. So I will probably be calling the action from that one live. But let's progress. At this point, Greg, I think we need a jingle whenever we get onto Teesside, whether that's Teesside or Teesside Steel, just to emphasize that this is the moment where we balance things for Greg, and the integrity of his assessments is put under a microscope. But I will give my assessment and then you can chip in with yours. They're obviously 3rd. Game week 4, massive dent in their title hopes. 7 points from 5 games is a decent return for most sides, but not for a team with ambitions of winning the league and securing promotion. Their unbeaten run, which has been one of the standout storylines of this season, finally came to the end. And not just once, but twice as well across the weekend. The first against Hull and East Yorkshire, we've already discussed how good Tyler McClelland was, but I don't think many would have predicted Hull to be the side that end that run, which stretched to 31 games going back to, I think, October or September 2024. Then the defeat to Leeds Dynamos, which I covered on commentary, and that one was really telling. They just looked completely out of ideas. They tried to adjust, they tried to switch positions, they looked for different solutions, but any and everything they tried, it didn't work. And you could sense the frustration from the commentary gantry. And then they did cap things off with a 3-0 win over Nottingham Forest, but that would have been an expectation more than anything else. Greg, give me your assessments of Teesside still, and do we now see them dip out of that title race?
Here we go. Yeah, disappointing. I can't sugarcoat it. It's just massively disappointing. To your point, they just looked devoid of ideas. Whatever I saw. So obviously there was the streaming issues with the first game. Watch the second half, because apparently in the first 20 minutes of their game against Manchester City, which was the only one of the day of the game week for them, they created a few chances, but just weren't clinical enough to take them. Created a couple of golden opportunities that would have had them comfortable at half time. Second half, I managed to watch because the stream was up and running, and they're just now devoid of all ideas in the second half. Manchester City were resolute in their defence, and it just was a theme that carried on. They have got chair issues, and I'm going to throw that that is the only context. That is the only context I can add in to say Oscar Morgan's got chair. His chair was dead like halfway through the Hull East Yorkshire game. So that's the only context I can add to that, because it was disappointing, even if he had a full powered chair. Like I said, devoid of all ideas. They weren't clinical enough. That Dynamo's game, any chances they did create, and they were few and far between, they weren't taking. Yes, they tried some things. Their passing wasn't even there. That's one thing you can rely on Teesside Steel for, is playing an expansive style of football. From whatever I watched, we was non-existent in game week 4. And you look, with this form they've got, and if those chair issues I mentioned aren't resolved, then their fixtures, Norwich, then they go Villa, Rockets, Lions, Manchester United, West Bromwich Baggies, and Nottinghamshire. That is one of, if not the probable toughest 5-game weekends you are going to have in the Championship. It is quite a mirrored situation, isn't it, with Teesside Steel and us at Teesside, both having, the 2 5-game weekends at the back end of the season, both having extremely difficult game week 5. But for me, I think, they're out of it as a title challenger. I think they need to be more concerned now at this point. We're looking over their shoulder behind them than possibly looking above them. Manchester United, the only saving grace they have, I think, for me, is Manchester United have played a game more, and they play each other in game week 5. But certainly at the minute, on form and the way Manchester United are playing, you'd have them as heavy, heavy underdogs in that game. So they've done well to go on that unbeaten run. But you mentioned it all the time, Brian, that unbeaten run had a lot of draws in it. It wasn't full-on wins.
Yeah, it did. And I know it was almost there for the taking, because they never blow opponents away. They're always very measured, very controlled. I struggle with that excuse for chair issues, because it's not the first time you've sat here on the podcast and spoken about something to do with Teesside Steel chairs or batteries. When there's this much on the line, you ensure that there is no issues, because these aren't issues that just cropped up in game weeks 4. They've been fairly persistent across the season. And if you want that championship title, that premiership position, you don't allow that to become a factor. So I do struggle with that slightly. I alluded to the predictions episode where I said Teesside would be champions, but heavily, heavily caveated. You can go back and listen to it with the inclusion of Owen Swift because they need that natural PF1 wide threat, without which they're too predictable. And it's not necessarily a criticism. They're still a very strong side, as shown with that ridiculous run. But at this level, and when I say this level, the top 2 or 3 positions in the championship, those small matters, small differences come into play. Teams are now more prepared for them. They're more organised against them. They can stretch the game against them. And it becomes really hard for Teesside Steel to create the chances that they potentially got earlier in the season. Individually, I will factor in some of your comments, but individually, not the levels we've come to expect. Oscar Mulgrew found it incredibly difficult. Jamil Khan wasn't able to influence games in the way we've come to expect. Isaac Murray, when used higher, didn't have the same impact. It's something that I've been calling for quite some time, but he didn't. It wasn't the best audition for one of those 3 attacking wide positions, or so one of those 3 attacking positions. Now, despite all that, despite that criticism, they're still 4 points off the top. And Gameweek 5 gives them a real opportunity because they do face Manchester United and Nottinghamshire, who also play each other. So whilst it's no longer in their hands, they can still decide the potential title winner. And I almost want to preface all of this because it sounds like I'm being incredibly harsh. This is the standard that Teesside Steel have set. If they want to be considered as one of the top teams in the division, we need to hold them to a higher standard. So if they dip below that expectation, we're going to notice it. We're going to comment on it. And we're going to say that we're a little bit disappointed. They will be frustrated. But I wonder whether they just assumed that they were almost sleepwalking their way to the top division because they're a very confident bunch of players. But I think it's just caught them by surprise. And what looked like an almost certain Premiership run is now looking like one that ends in them staying in the Championship, because the conversations I had with them, I don't even know if they've got a squad able to be fielded at a potential playoff, with some of them on holidays and with other commitments. So some really big conversations need to be had in and amongst the ranks, but it does set up a really interesting finish because we've seen it before. I think it was the 22-23 championship. It went down to the final game with multiple teams level on points and goal difference deciding it. Could we see something similar again? But for Teesside, it is simple. They need a huge final weekend and they need results elsewhere to go their way.
Yeah, and their goal difference is certainly lacking now compared to Manchester United and Nottinghamshire. I'd disagree with the take that they were too confident going into, that they were sleepwalking their way into promotion, because I think they themselves are certainly a lot of the squad were aware of some of that they hadn't. Yes, they were on this big unbeaten run, but it hadn't been as confident as it looks on paper. But they were certainly frustrated. I know the head coach, Graham Mulgrew, was certainly frustrated with a lot of what he saw at the weekend, and he knew that they dipped far below the level. And I don't think you're being harsh at all. I certainly think it was massively disappointing, well below the standards they set of themselves, and that obviously we'd hold them to. And they've got big questions to ask of themselves, and they've got to really dig deep if they want to try and keep their dream of promotion alive, because it is out of their hands to an extent. But technically, they've got 5 games, one of which against Man United. If they win all 5 of their games, they'll be up. Looking at the maths, so big a couple of weeks preparation. They haven't got a lot. That's the key thing we mentioned is quick turnaround. They haven't got a lot of time to get things sorted.
Does that work for you or against you, do you think, that quick rollover from game weeks 4 and 5 when it's fresh in your mind, the things you've done well, the things you need to work on? Or do you need that break to kind of completely take it out your mind and then go again with renewed focus?
I think it depends on your form. I think if you are on a really good run of form and playing really well, you want back to back. You want a quick turnaround because you don't want that opportunity for it to stagnate and lose momentum when you're playing games. Whereas I think if you're on the form of just not, if you've had a bad weekend as Teesside still have had, they possibly would like a few extra weeks of just going back, reviewing it, putting in a lot more hours on the training ground, having that extra time to get things sorted. So yeah, for me, that's me sitting on the fence again, but I think it does change your perspective on whether you're in good form or not as to whether you want that quick turnaround.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. So we will see come the 11th and 12th of April. So now let's progress to the penultimate team in the division. In second, we've got Manchester United. And I'll be honest, I had high hopes for them coming into the season. I've spoken about how highly I rate players like David D, Laura Evans, Josh Slack. Not that I don't rate the rest of their squad, but for me, those are genuinely division leading players. Then you add even more firepower mid-season. Mason Davies, who for some is the best young player in the country. Liam Fitzpatrick, one of the most prolific wingers in the division's history. And you start asking the question is, how do you actually stop them? The only side that really came close across game week 4 was West Bromwich Albion Baggies, which you've already spoken about at length. Gregg, 2-2, that one finished. And from that point on, United just went on this dominant ruthless run, 3-0 win over Leeds Dynamos, where Leeds had no answers to the combinations between David D and Mason Davies. A 4-0 win over Manchester City, which was about as comprehensive as you'll see against a side that's usually very difficult to break down. And then 3-0 win over Hull and East Yorkshire to finish the weekend, a side that we've just spoken about as being one of the most informed teams in the division. So 10 points from a possible 12. And with Nottinghamshire and Teesside both dropping points, they now go into the final weekend with a huge opportunity to lift the trophy. Gregg, give me your assessments, please.
Yeah, because after game week 3, it's fair to say I definitely maybe got a bit carried away and was all aboard the Manchester United, championship. They're gonna win the league at a canter and all aboard, choo choo, Premiership one way. Yeah, they'd be so disappointing with the draw with Baddies because they scored so late, 30, 7 minutes on the clock. They got the goal that looked like it was going to take them to a victory, and the maximum points are 12 from 12. They'd be sat on 41, 2 points clear of Nottinghamshire. Yes, they'll play the game more, but they'll play each other, and you could have gone, what, we could take a point out of this, perhaps. As it is, they responded really well. When they get it right, the combination play is absolutely just a joy to watch. David D, Mason Davies, Liam Fitzpatrick, Laura Evans is, I think, for me, the strongest attacking starting four in the division. And they need to start that four in every single game they play. Laura Evans is one that just goes under the radar. She turns defense into attack so quick, carries the ball from the edge of her own box, and you blink and it's on the edge of the attacking box. It just is so reliable for David D to know that he has someone behind him who is that dependable. And the potential in the squad is what excites me, because Mason Davies was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. He just, like I say, one of the most promising and exciting young players we have in the country. Remember the name for years in the future, because you're looking at David D and Mason Davies as two players that, if they reach their potential, will be wearing an England shirt.
Exactly that. Voted the Swizzle standout player of the weekend, rightfully so. 5 goals and 5 assists across the weekend tells you everything about Mason Davies' form. Uh, we knew how good he was from his time at Sale United and latterly Alshinham. We saw it in flashes in Game Week 3 with Manchester United, but this felt like the moment he really announced himself in a United shirt. They look more direct, more clinical, and more dangerous when he's on the court, and that says so much when players like Josh Slack, Liam Fitzpatrick, Shannon Smith, Sam Taylor are having to compete for minutes because this young superstar is taking them off them. Um, what stands out, certainly when I watch Manchester United, is they're not relentless. They don't, it's not overwhelming pressure. It's controlled. They're not trying to dominate every second of every game. I think they slow things down, draw teams in, and then pick their moments to attack with power, precision, but with speed. It's fascinating to watch. It really is. Because whilst the scorelines can look very one sided, they are not wasteful at all. They're one of the most efficient teams I've watched in the National League. They don't create and miss loads, they create in the right moment at the right time, and they're clinical. I mean, if we was to compare it with the professional running game, the stat would be XG. I think their XG would be exactly the amount of goals they score. Um, but the football that Pete Taylor's got them playing is a joy to watch. The combinations, the chemistry, the continuity, which will only get better because this is only the third ever weekend that two of the players that you've mentioned joined them in the winter transfer window, and the two others in Laura Evans and David D joined them in the summer window. So this is a completely new squad, or certainly starting four, than what we saw last season. You wouldn't know because they gelled together so brilliantly. The connection between Mason Davies and David D. We know they've played together before. You can see the understanding, the time in the movement, the combinations, but when you consider their ages as well, their inexperience relative to others in the division, it is a joke. Both ended up in the fantasy team of the weekend, and rightfully so. But I think you touched on it. It's important to highlight and signify the foundation of that success, and that is Laura Evans. The control, the composure, the structure. She allows the rest to thrive and flourish. And I genuinely don't think they're in a title conversation without her. We see a lot of good teams up and down the division, and a lot of time it is that goalkeeper that is the missing piece of the puzzle. So no, fantastic. And also, we would be remiss not to talk about Liam Fitzpatrick, who started to find his rhythm since rejoining Manchester United. Hat trick against Hull, looking confident, taking his opportunities. And I did have the pleasure of commentating with him for one of the games across the weekend. We just had a conversation about his move from Greenbank. And it throws up a debate that we spoke about with Noah Stevenson Lee. Are you prioritising minutes potentially in a lower division, or are you sitting on the bench in a Premiership competing side? He's answered that question for me by saying, or even making the move down, which is a brave thing to do. And you can see him reaping the rewards now. And if they go on to lift the title, which they will absolutely have aspirations of, he will play a huge role in that being the case.
Exactly. I think when you're able to bring in the quality that they have, not only in the summer, but also through the winter, you know, they've saw the, but I think what the good thing for me is, right, they've signed obviously Laura Evans, David in the summer. They put together a little squad and then realized, you know what, we've got something here. What are we missing just to make it the squad we have now? They went out, got Liam Fitzpatrick back, promoted Mason Davies from the sister club at Altrincham. They've not wasted the opportunity, they're not wasting any time, waiting until the summer, then putting the squad together and then going, right, now we can attack the league. They knew they had an opportunity. There were one or two players away from having that ability to really as you see, their meteoric rise from Gameweek 3, Gameweek 4, to now they're in the right thick of, they'll go up. I think we can pretty much say that they're in a title challenge. So I think that's what's really good for me is they've taken the advantage, not sat in their laurels and go, we'll wait around till next summer and go. They've seized the moment.
Yeah, completely. If we look ahead to game week 5, it's all set up for them. They open up against Nottingham Forest, which on paper is an opportunity to build momentum and potentially add to that goal difference, which currently sees Nottinghamshire better them in the tables. And then it's the big ones, Teesside Steel and Nottinghamshire back to back. If they win those, then they put themselves in a strong position to lift the title, almost a inevitable position to win the title. And then, as we alluded to earlier, the final game against their sister club, Altrincham. So we could see them. That'd be a really interesting dynamic, but it won't be easy. But the opportunity is very much there, and the version we've seen of them in Game Week 3 and Game Week 4 probably, for me, makes them favourites. But that is very much up for debate. Now let's progress to our 12th and final team in Nottinghamshire at the table once again. Another, I would say, quietly efficient weekend for them. 8 points from a possible 12, just getting the job done without really needing to hit top gear. But we have to talk about this defence because it is genuinely ridiculous. 1 goal conceded all season. 1. And when you consider we're saying this is the most competitive championship division we've ever seen, that makes it even more impressive. I've gone back and looked at previous seasons. Norwich in the 2011-2012 season conceded 2. Villa Rockets in 2009-2010 conceded 4. But those were very different eras of the sport. To be operating at this level defensively in 2026 against the level of opposition is incredible. Leeds Dynamos are the only side who have managed to score against them, and that was an error on Matt Hadfield's behalf, if I recall rightly. So whilst they're not blowing teams away in an attacking sense, their defensive foundation and platform is what keeps them where they are, top of the table heading into the final weekend. They opened with a 2-0 win over GBG Saracens, very controlled, very assured. Kieran Wade and Sam Langley with the goals. Then another 2-0 win, this time over Villa Rockets Lions with the exact same goal scorers, before a much more conservative Sunday with back-to-back 0-0 draws against West Bromwich Albion, Baggies, and Hull and East Yorkshire. And that probably sums them up. They don't take unnecessary risks. They manage games and they trust their structure, which is why they are top of the table. Greg, give me your assessments.
Yeah, they're just quietly going about the business, aren't they? Letting the likes of Manchester United take the spotlight. Still unbeaten. Only conceded 1 goal all season, which is pretty much ludicrous. They're not scoring loads, which I think is fine for this season. But if I'm looking at the big picture going forward into next season, assuming obviously they're going to go up, which I mean, I'd be flabbergasted if they don't. Because something we're going to draft me wrong. I just think about where the goals they come from in an attempt to stay up next season in the Premiership, because it's all very good having that defensive stability in this division. We saw last season in the Premiership, it wasn't quite the same, and they did struggle to score. However, we're not on about Premiership this season. Championship, unbeaten, 1 goal conceded. I left Saturday, not knowing their fixtures on the Sunday, saying to the Teesside Steel, a lot of the Manchester United lot going, yeah, they're 7 points clear now. Yeah, that's their title wraps up. 2 draws on the Sunday, yes. It was against Hull and East Yorkshire and Baggies, who are 2 different squads now. 2 exciting squads. Have left the door open for Manchester United, especially, to come in and give them a real test. And I think I can't wait for that fixture in Gameweek 5, Nottinghamshire and Manchester United, the clash in styles. Nottinghamshire, resolute defence. Manchester United, the attacking ability. But Ryan, can you imagine losing one game all season and conceding like under 5 goals perhaps and not winning the league?
It's ridiculous, isn't it? When you break it down like that, the fact they've been on this formidable unbeaten run and it could come down to their penultimate game of the season that decides the title for them. But that is the beauty and the intrigue of this division. But I think they've almost opened the door to Manchester United with their almost lack of bravery. So there is a few things I'd like to see changed or tweaked. Kieran Wade, for example, so reluctant to play in reverse out wide, which really does hurt them. If he can shape to face his own goal when advancing up the court, it would be so much better, not only for himself, but Adam or Sam Langley centrally, who both love receiving the ball in space in that area. The classification does hurt them slightly. Matt Hadfield sits at the base, is arguably one of their best players. You've got Adam Langley, Sam Langley, Leighton G, all PF2s, which means they can't be on the court together, which I'm sure they would love to be the case. And it does limit them. If they are promoted, which looks inevitable at this point, they need to, just like Teesside Steel, they need to add another high quality PF1 wide option to balance the side. If they have that, they've got the defensive foundation to stay up in the Premiership. It was a shock that they were relegated in the first place, but we all acknowledge they are one player, one piece of the puzzle away from just being a solid mid-table Premiership side. And that's still the case, but it does need recruitment. And if we just look at Game Week 5, they open against Nottingham Forest and Norwich, so a fantastic chance not only to get wins but to increase that goal difference, because we could see it come down to goal difference come season's end. And then the massive fixtures against Manchester United and Teesside Steel before concluding. They conclude against Teesside Steel, but they've got Villa Rockets wedged between those. So all the top 4 teams meeting each other. The big question is, can they keep that defensive record intact? Because against that level of opposition, across that volume of games, that's going to be seriously tested.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think that a team that's only conceded 1 and lost none across the first 4 game weeks could not win the league. It seems to boggle the mind. And yet, for me, if I had to pick a champion right now, I'd go Manchester United, despite having played a game more than Nottinghamshire, just because their form, the way that they're attacking, leads me to believe that they've got enough about them to break down Nottinghamshire. I could be completely wrong, because Nottinghamshire are, a real stubborn team. Matt Hadfield made the team of the weekend. Pretty certain.
Yeah, he did, and deservedly so, because he is the main player in that defensive shape. But obviously, I'm not comparing directly, but it's similar to Norwich City in a way that they came out the traps flying in Game Week 1. If we're focusing on Nottinghamshire in isolation, they scored 22 goals across their opening 4 games without reply. So they can do it, and it was against some top teams: GWG Saracens, Altrincham, West Bromwich Albion, Baggies. I know Hull and East Yorkshire, who they beat on the first game of the season, were without Tyler McClellan then. So you have to look at that kind of in isolation a little bit, but it shows they have the attacking firepower. They can do it, but they just haven't been brave enough to really try and implement that style of football since, which, similar to Norwich, from a mutual perspective, is incredibly frustrating, because they have the foundation. Just go for it now.
Yeah, but I think for me, it just shows how well the other teams have developed and grown in the league. To say that it's not easy anymore. Teams that you were beating by 5 or 6 goals in the first weekend are now able to take points off you. We said that
with 8 goals. West Bromwich Albion Baggies lost 8-0 on the first game of the season and managed to get a 0-0 draw.
we said it at the beginning of the podcast, and we're now going to say it at the end. The development of these teams, there are no easy games anymore. And that is what is exciting and sets us up for, 3 weeks' time. We're back at N2E for Gameweek 5, and then you just don't know what's going to happen. It is all up for grabs.
It certainly is. Right, I think that just about brings us to the end of episode 51. A big thank you to everyone listening and supporting the podcast. It does mean so much. Of course, a big thank you to MK Battery for continuing to power this podcast and every National League live stream. Their support really does make all of this possible. A reminder, we've got Game Week 4 of the Premiership coming up this coming weekend on March 28th and 29th. So plenty more action. Gregg and I will be back next week to recall and recap the action from that. And then all eyes turn to the final weekend of the Championship, April 11th and 12th. Everything's still on the line, from the title race to the fight for third and the battle at the bottom. It's set up perfectly, so don't miss it. As always, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Gregg.
Thank you, Ryan.